Welcome to the Energy Conversations podcast, your go-to source for unpacking the complexities of the South African energy sector. My name is Thokozile Zambane. I will be your guide, and every 2 weeks, we will be on a journey of bridging the knowledge gap surrounding South Africa's energy sector and the transition to a low-carbon economy. Welcome back to the Energy Conversations podcast, where we break down the complexities of the South African energy sector into digestible insights as we explore pivotal topics shaping the future of energy in South Africa and beyond. I am your host, Thokozile Zambane, and today I'm excited to be hosting a roundtable discussion on the strides being made by women who are making a phenomenal impact on South Africa's energy sector. When I started working in the energy sector over 13 years ago, I was struck by how in most meetings I would find myself being the only woman in the room. With a report by the International Renewable Energy Agency revealing that women only represent 32% of the renewable energy workforce, the question is why? And I believe that a number of the answers to that why can only be found by tapping into the lived experiences of women currently working in and making an impact on the South African energy sector. Before we kick off today's discussion, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce today's guests and ask them briefly to share about their current roles in the energy sector. Vutomi, if I may start with you, please.
Thank you very much, Thokozile. I am Vutomi, currently working at a company called ACWA Power. We're an independent power producer founded in Saudi Arabia, and we have offices here in South Africa. So I'm an executive manager in the business development team here in South Africa.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Noluthando, if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Noluthando Yeni. I work for an independent power producer and IPP called EDF Renewables. It's a French-based company that has its offices in South Africa for the Sub-Saharan Africa mandate or strategy of the company. And I work in the project finance team as a project finance transactor and specialist. Yeah, and I think that's it for now.
Thank you very much. Zinhle, if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Thokozile. My name is Zinhle Kunene. I currently work for a company called Energy with its headquarters in Dubai, working in the South African office as a project development analyst with just 5 years in renewable energy. I think that's a teeny-weeny number compared to all the women in here, but it's quite a privilege to be in the space.
Thank you very much, Zinhle. Ugesh, if I could ask you to briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am very excited to be part of the renewable energy industry for 15 years now. I have been consulting to the industry on economic development. So for about 12 years, my business is called DevRani Consult. It's actually named after my parents, my late dad, Dev, and my mom, Rani. And very excited to be participating today to share opportunities for females, especially within the renewable energy industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ugesh. Devaksha, if I can end off with you.
Thanks. So my name is Devaksha Maharaj. I'm the founder and current managing director of an SMME called Ikigai Engineering. We are a multifaceted energy business in consulting and services, maintenance, training and development. And we're based in Pretoria, but we have a national footprint with key offices along Eastern Cape, KZN, and partners in the rest of the country.
Thank you very much. Let's get the conversation started. I'd like to start with you, Vutomi. Navigating the energy sector can be challenging, but also rewarding. And understanding how leaders like you have begun your careers can offer some valuable insights to those coming after you. How did you end up in the sector, and what advice would you give to women looking to navigate and grow their careers in the energy sector?
So how I ended up in the energy space is really by chance, luck, maybe by the grace of, I'll say even by the grace of God, really. So I studied geology in university, and here I was thinking post-university, I'm going to work in the exploration space or work for a large mine. And unfortunately, my plan A and my plan B didn't work out. Thankfully, during varsity, a friend of mine encouraged me that we apply for, we have a plan C basically. So we applied for an internship by the National Research Foundation. This is over 10 years ago now. And the National Research Foundation was essentially incentivizing corporates to give graduates work experience. So that plan C became plan A. I was then placed in an IPP called Sky Power, and we were responding to the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, what we call REI4P, REI-PPP, whichever one you like. And from there on, essentially, while I was there, I was still very much keen to pursue a career in mining, obviously. So I worked very, very hard, landed myself with a recommendation letter from my employers at the time, and they said, don't say you're an intern in your CV, you are a junior project manager, and we will vouch for you to go and shine in mining. That recommendation letter came in handy for me to basically land up at my first real job, which was then ACWA Power. I then never looked back after that. Opportunities did come up in mining, but it was another internship, and I was like, I'm already an intern. Do I want to be a professional intern? No. So I pursued the opportunity with ACWA, and it led me to where I am right now. And then in terms of advice I'd give for women, it's a loaded question, looking to navigate the energy sector. I'd say, firstly, stay abreast of industry trends. That's very important. And also continue to develop yourself and learn. I think we have a phenomenal community of women in energy. And in these platforms, we share content amongst each other, i.e., when the market evolved and the battery energy storage tender round 1 came out, one of the women actually shared a book on understanding basics of battery energy storage. So that's examples of which you can use to continuously learn and evolve and grow within the sector. Second, I'll say invest in a mentor and a coach. Those are very, very important. Those are two different individuals. Some you can find a 2-in-1, but it's important that you also identify a mentor and a coach, which are individuals you look up to, going where you want to go or where you want to be in future. And then I'll say third, prior to the last, advice I'd give is networking. Network your life away. If you are given an opportunity to attend a conference, events, drinks, informal drinks with industry professionals as well, utilize that and network. Advice for young people, I'd say, sometimes you go to conferences and people just hang around people that they know. Hang around with people you don't know. Introduce yourself to a lot of people. You never know, one of those individuals that you say hello to may become your sponsor, and a sponsor is somebody who will vouch for you and speak for you in rooms where you are not present. And this is something that you would probably not be in control of, unlike having a mentor and a coach. And then I'd say, lastly, have a developmental plan for yourself. So when you enter a role, have a 3-year plan if you're still younger, and if you've grown in your career, the 3-year plan becomes a 5 years or even a 7 years plan, where when you enter a role in the first 2 years, you're really building on mastery of the skills in that role that you're in. And then in your second, third year, you start thinking about, if I'm a coordinator at this point and I want to grow into a manager, what do I need to actively do to get there? Which skills do I need to acquire? And work on acquiring those skills so that when the time comes for you to grow into the next position, you are equipped to have the conversations with your current employer, or if unfortunate there are no internal opportunities, you can look outside, and then you are equipped and your CV is built up for your next role. So that's my advice that I'd give to especially women.
Thank you very much for that. And I think the importance of having a plan is always so important, because if you don't have your own plan, you will just be a cog in another person's plan. And that's something really to consider, that, somebody in an organization may have a plan for you, but you need to ensure that you have a plan for yourself, to ensure that whatever plans are being made actually align with what it is that you want to achieve. In our last episode of the podcast, we had an opportunity to really unpack and discuss the financing of the just energy transition. And that's because financing is actually such a critical component of the energy sector and often less visible than other technical roles. I'd like to bring Noluthando into the conversation here and specifically your experience in this area. And perhaps you can shed some light on the diverse career paths that are in fact available. The question then is, what are some of the career paths in the energy sector, and how did you decide on finance?
Thanks, Thokozile. Yeah, like you say, the finance component is quite a big component and is kind of this ghost in the background that really structures and influences a lot of what becomes of the projects. Just from a career paths perspective, I think there's a lot you can do or can explore in the energy sector. You know, there's the engineering, the construction space, the technical aspects, but I think very often not enough is spoken about consultancy and how much more can happen. So there's the technical and engineering consultancy that feeds into the funding process and the strategy of these projects, but also there's also a lot of like a gap in the market when we look at the management of community trusts that very often are part of these project structures, and consulting firms I think are best placed to also just think around how we can have efficient and management of these community trusts in a way that is quite integrous and really speaks to the values and the purpose of why they're set up. Also in the socioeconomic development and economic development space, which I think some of the panelists can speak to because that's a lot of the work they do. So community work, because very often, like most of us have introduced, the IPPs are foreign investors, or really their biggest investment interest is getting the project to a point at which they can make returns. But there are a lot of investments for the community that government seeks to extract from these projects, and that really speaks to growing the sector from a local perspective. And I think these are some of the career paths where skills can be transferred from other and borrowed from other career paths, just much like Vutomi, who had a certain plan and found herself in the energy space. Then there's the ordinary legal and financing roles, like you say, and structuring roles, much like what I'm in, what I do in terms within the sector. And how I found myself in that space, I think for me, I was a project financier, and I decided and set my heart on being a project financier. The energy sector found me because, again, skills can be transferable. So at the time when I joined the space, or when I started my career, project finance was quite heavily used or widely used in the mining sector, in the transportation sector, and infrastructure. So broad, big scale infrastructure that really requires project financing principles to fund. And I think at the time, the energy sector was still new and growing and really required a lot of heavy lifting from a policy making perspective. And so very little could be done from the financing aspect. And we couldn't really imagine how we would fund these objectives, government objectives. Would it be a corporate financing? Would it be a project financing, etc.? And I think when it became clearer and there was more visibility into the sector, I could take a view of really looking at my skills and getting into the sector, which was a booming sector and still is a booming sector, a new sector, which is very exciting for me. I always like new challenges. And so I kind of took my project financing skills and really looked into focusing and specializing within the energy sector using those skills. So that's the path I took. But I think that now that the sector has taken quite a bit of shape and form, and we can see a lot of the push and pull to privatize the sector and to really involve a lot of other stakeholders, I think the opportunities from a career path perspective become more and more interesting and robust. And so I urge people who are studying whatever they're studying to at the back of their mind realize that there is an energy sector, especially women who in various fields where some of the skills can be transferred.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. And I love that both you and Vutomi have highlighted the importance of transferability. I mean, incidentally, I also had started in the mining space as a project finance lawyer. And when the energy, when REAP came about, all of a sudden that skill in project finance could easily then find itself in developing large scale projects. And I then really fully started to understand concepts like bankability, which often comes up in, in terms of how are we ensuring that these investments that are being made are able to provide the necessary return. But I think a concept or something that I've been recently playing around with is the concept of bankability actually cuts across not just a project, but in your own career and in your own life path. How do you actually ensure that you are a bankable resource, right? So Vutomi just mentioned the importance of mentorship and networking, that those are powerful tools for career growth. And especially in a competitive sector like energy, if nobody knows you're there, nobody's actually going to come through to you, but you need to find the right sponsors, mentors, and be at the right events where you can meet the right people. I want to then bring in Zinhle into the conversation here and just ask from your perspective, what role has mentorship and networking played in your career, and how can women really leverage these tools to advance their careers in the energy sector? And perhaps you can just share if you have any personal experiences from having utilized these tools.
Yes, thank you so much, Thokozile. I think as a very young and still booming person in the energy career space, mentorship has played a very pivotal role in my career. So when I started a mentorship program with the group called We Connect, it's a mentorship program that's specifically designed for young women in the space to connect to their mentors. And also what I loved about that program is that the mentees are actually given the right, or rather the responsibility to take the mentorship forward. So the mentees are the ones that are like driving the mentorship. So that was a really interesting part of the mentorship program. And what I also liked about the mentorship program was that it, as much as it was mainly about empowering women within the space, they also allowed mentors that are male figures, because at the end of the day, in order for women to be uplifted, we also need men to realize that women need to be uplifted. And for us to do that, we also need, maybe not a need, but like men need to be in the spaces so that they could realize the opportunities that women have been not getting. So it was a really nice and mentorship on that program. And I actually had a male mentor. His name was Malova Tehla. He was a really great mentor. And what the mentorship did, they would pair up your mentor and mentee in terms of the similarities in terms of your personalities, your likes, and how you want to shape your career. So in a book that I read that is called Lean In by Sherilyn Sandberg, who was the CEO of Facebook, I believe, she says she's met a lot of women randomly and they would ask her to be her mentor, and she says that would be very awkward. And I think it's very important also not to make mentorship awkward. I think it's also important to ask someone to be your mentor when you can see some sense or some level of connection between the mentor and the mentee. So that's what we connected. So where there was similarities, then they would pair up the mentor and the mentee. I think also when I moved to my second job at Midos Energy, a subsidiary of Vigo Energy, I met a really wonderful woman called Romaya Durasami. She was also the co-founder of the company. What she did was she would schedule one-on-one mentorships with all her staff members. So that will be outside of work, outside of the office, to make sure that the vibe is chilled and you are able to talk about what is affecting you in your personal life that is affecting your work, because that is also important. And I currently have a mentor now, Sandisha Jainaran. She's a lovely lady. I think it's important to always find a mentor that meets your standards, that meets your criteria, that meets what exactly you need from that mentor, because you cannot just have a mentor for the sake of being mentored. So I think it's also important as a mentee to take charge of the mentorship program and always find questions that you would ask your mentor in terms of how you could elevate your career going forward. So mentorship has played a very pivotal role in my career. And I think if you are looking for a mentor, just make sure it's someone that you connect with at some level, so that you don't make the mentorship awkward, because it'll die out eventually, and we don't really want that.
Thank you very much for that, Zinhle. And I think what you're also highlighting in discussing mentorship is, again, the importance then of the fact that this industry, in as much as it's a new industry, it's still a small industry, and you then really do come across the same people. I mean, you're mentioning like a phenomenal woman like Ramaya, who I've seen her build that business from the ground up. And it's those kind of learnings that will ensure that women like you then recognize that even though sometimes it can be a challenging journey, and you've seen firsthand what a challenging journey it is, that it is possible. That it is definitely possible. She's done such amazing work. I think continues to be an inspiration that it is possible. It may be hard, but it is possible. And I think you've also highlighted in that just we have to have men in these conversations. This is not women conversations. Yes, in this session, I wanted to hear specifically women views, but the reality is we are trying to sit at tables where men are still very much in control. We are trying to open businesses that traditionally have been very male dominated, and we do need that buy-in to a certain extent. So I think it is important to, have those conversations beyond just with women. But I think what is also quite exciting, and when we make the point about we're trying to sit at tables that men have potentially built, what is also exciting is that women are building their own tables in the form of their businesses, right? And entrepreneurship in the energy sector really comes with a unique set of challenges and opportunities. And it's quite important to understand those dynamics to really ensure that we have greater participation of women in the entrepreneurship space. Ugesh, I wanted to bring you into the conversation and really trying to understand from your perspective, what are the unique challenges and opportunities that women entrepreneurs face in the energy sector, and how can we actually address some of these challenges or make the most of these opportunities to foster greater participation of women in the sector?
Thank you for that question. As most of us are aware, the IPP sector is largely dominated by multinationals who own the projects. And what I find is that as a result of this, when tenders are issued, you largely also see white male-owned companies winning those tenders. So that has been happening historically. But however, as the industry is transforming and as we are seeing more females, more Black females entering the landscape and taking up senior positions, we're also seeing the transformation now of that industry in terms of other companies coming into the fold and women-owned businesses getting those opportunities to actually win tenders. And I think especially for new companies, for those new entrants, it's difficult because, again, as female-owned businesses, we still do have to work twice as hard and thrice as hard to actually get these opportunities. And it does take a lot of work, a lot of time as well to win those tenders and actually prove yourself. And I mentioned the transformation in the industry, and I must say that it's so exciting to see women participating more in the meetings that we have. So similar to the discussion that we're having today, in many meetings, I'm actually seeing women representing environmental companies, women representing construction companies in the technical teams. So for me, that is also very encouraging. But I think the trend is that as you see transformed corporates, then you're actually seeing that diversification happening. I think one of the big challenges, and I think that's also the fear that many people have to leave corporates, is actually cash flow. Starting your own business means that you need to secure income for long periods of time. So I would definitely recommend people to try and get longer term contracts to sort of assist with the cash flow. But the challenge that we have, and we're still facing with the larger corporates, is delays in payments, taking long with contracts, especially during construction phases, because there's just so many things that are happening, so many moving parts. And again, you have a specific period that you need to construct a project, and hence everything needs to happen all at once. If you can secure long-term contracts, then that's definitely something that is recommended. and having those conversations as well with the commercial teams, because another challenge is that, the commercial teams within these organizations don't speak to the ED teams. And what happens is, you negotiate a contract based on your best price technical capabilities, but you're not necessarily taking into consideration the economic development requirements of the project. And I've seen this happening quite often, and also your Black economic empowerment requirements. So as a result, upfront, if you are aware of this, if the commercial teams are negotiating these contracts and are aware of all the economic development obligations, then surely you will be appointing more female-owned companies, more Black female-owned companies as well. I think that in terms of the opportunities, there are massive opportunities within the renewable energy industry. If you look at the value chain of the project, except from the items that have to be imported, you really can tender for any scope of work, be it technical, be it financial. And we also not only speaking to business owners, but also those that are seeking career opportunities. It's massive at the moment. With and excuse me for using all the lingo in the renewable energy industry, but with Window 5 coming alive now, reaching financial close with the risk mitigation projects. We all know those stalled for quite a long period, but with all those projects coming into fold and recent rounds being tendered also, as we know, going into battery and multiple technology, etc. It's really so robust, and there is really not enough people within the sector. There's so much of opportunity at the moment. It's actually mind-boggling how much of opportunities there are. So I encourage people outside of the sector to also take bold moves and enter the sector. And I want to say that's also a challenge. The challenge, and I see lots of people applying for jobs, but if you don't have minimum 2 or 3 year renewable energy industry, then you are not considered for the opportunity. And I think we need to change that dynamic. Because, if you worked in a construction project and there are massive construction projects that we have in the country, then you will be able to learn quick and fast how to, what is required within our sector. So I would speak to those that are listening in, please be more open-minded in terms of allowing non-renewable energy people into the industry. We need it. The skills are scarce at the stage, and ideally request you to please consider those without the minimum 1 year, 2 year experience that we're asking, and give them an opportunity. Because as you know, also, because of the movement, you're training people and then they're leaving within a year, they're leaving within 6 months because of the opportunity. So that's also a challenge within the sector, but it's creating opportunities as well. Before I leave, I just want to mention one more thing. A lot of us work in Johannesburg or Cape Town, and we're very familiar with the corporate life and the opportunities that we've seen from the large corporates. But within the renewable energy sector, the projects are built in rural areas. And within these rural areas, there's opportunities for businesses. So whatever business that you have, whatever business you want to offer within the context of our cities, please look at partnering with local businesses where these projects are being built. Consider those opportunities. Consider, like we spoke about, finding local partners, allowing for skills exchange, and developing thriving economies. There is massive opportunity there, and there is a challenge in terms of, again, when you're building the projects, finding businesses with the right experiences. So if you have a business, please look at this opportunity. Get out of your comfort zone of the big city life and look at how can you stimulate township economy.
Thank you very much for that, Ugesh, and really making some key points, especially around the skills scarcity that we have in the sector, and that is something that needs to be filled. Then we really need to have a concerted effort in it, and we need to relook at what we're looking at in trying to get new graduates or new people into the sector. Incidentally, we have an episode coming up in a month or so around skills development, and how do we then deal with the scarcity of skills that currently exist. And I love what you're also saying about getting out of Joburg. I spent most of my time in corporate in Joburg, and it was only in my entrepreneurial journey that I got to see, oh my goodness, money is actually not made in Sandton. It is just facilitated and moved around in Sandton, but money is actually made on the outskirts. And that's what we must remember, that it's not going to be cute, it's not going to be sexy, but at the end of the day, it is made there, and you can then decide that you maybe want to come spend it this side, but at least put yourself in the position to be able to get those opportunities. And I love what you've spoken about, that there's opportunities, the regulatory environment is there. So everything kind of gears towards saying that as a woman, this is your time, step in now. But I think the elephant in the room is that gender bias is real. It is real that when you walk into a room as a woman, the assumption is that of ignorance, or the assumption is of, oh, she's going to be more concerned about her nails than anything else. Devaksha, I want to end off with you here, or with this round of questions, and maybe just hear from you. Have you experienced any gender biases working in technical and engineering roles in the energy space?
Yeah, thanks, Thukizile. I think if I have to say no, I'd be lying. So it's real. Gender bias is real. I think from the day that you enter your university space or your technical space to complete a technical qualification, you are experiencing it. From a personal perspective, the industry has changed. It has transformed significantly in the last, in my career span of 16 years. But the subtle gender biasness or unconscious gender bias still exists. I mean, from walking into a room and everybody expecting you to take the minutes, I've experienced that, or to grab them a coffee, to not even taking into consideration your opinion or your technical expertise on a matter. I mean, up until this morning on a site visit, I experienced that. And you grow a thick skin as you get along. And I think many young females are afraid of doing that. And it's a little bit unfair on us that we have to put in an extra foot in, but in order for us to gain that respect, that's the path that we have to take. So, you have to be all out to making sure that you are experienced, you educated in that background, and that you walk your talk. That for me carries a lot of weight. I've been in on sites where I've listened to what everybody else had to say, and I kept quiet till then I said something, and then suddenly there's a change of opinion of who I was when I first walked in. So it's very much still prevalent in the entrepreneurship field, in the corporate field. It's still there, and it's something that we have to work together. And as my colleague alluded to earlier, we have to incorporate bringing men on board and making sure that they are aware, because it's an unconscious bias. On a personal side, I mean, I've got retrenched a week after coming out of maternity leave, only because I wasn't there for 6 months to clock in. And at that stage, I wasn't forceful enough to take it up further legally. But these are the things that happen in the corporate world. And retrenchment happens quite often. And these are the little things that people think would not happen. I noticed your reaction when I said that. But those are the things that happen. On the flip side, my role before I left to get into entrepreneurship as a consultant, I went through a state of victimization with my managing director. And because I stood my ground, I was asked to leave. So those biases exist. It's how, to what extent we handle it and how far we're willing to take that fight. I think any woman that walks into the engineering sector should know that they are ready to become an advocate for gender biasness and equity.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the honesty about that, because I think those are the conversations that we really need to understand. I mean, I recently moderated one of the sessions at Enlight, the CEO forum. And what shocked me was that there was one woman in the room, and it was me, the moderator. I wasn't even there in my capacity as an executive. And that for me, and I remember, having different conversations, and that kept being my shock point of, but how, gentlemen, how are we still here? And, there were conversations of, women aren't technical sometimes, or they want to have babies, and I'm like, so she has a baby and then can no longer do the job. And those for me, like, it was really concerning, because I feel like unless there is a concerted effort, we will keep relying on the same excuses. And pregnancy and motherhood is not a disability. In fact, I have seen, firsthand with friends of mine who have become mothers, that they have actually become even better employees than they were before, because there is no time for wasting. I want to get the job done because I want to get home to my kids. And I would think that that's an employee, or that's somebody on your team you actually want there. I mean, I don't need to sit and chit chat longer by the watering hole. But what I want to then talk about is then the reality is getting in is hard, staying is hard. So it then the picture that we see at the top in leadership roles starts making sense. But what do we do to then overcome this? And I want to bring Vutomi back into the conversation here, and maybe for you to unpack, how can corporations in the energy sector create more opportunities for women in leadership roles? What are some of the successful initiatives that you've seen or perhaps been part of to get you to that leadership role?
Thank you very much, Thokozile. So in terms of what corporations can do, I think the first point being really affording women a seat at the table, and a table where decisions are made, and allowing them to speak and let their voice be heard, just like the males that are in the room. I think what Devaksha shared is very much prevalent. Most of us women in the energy space will have experienced it one too many times. And it's really quite phenomenal when you see corporations that afford women a seat at the table, and women don't feel like you are a woman at the table. You are actually an astute professional. You have some value to add, and that's how you treat it. I think that's very, very key. And that's what corporations should strive for, in more so even in our energy space being so male dominated, around 12 years post the first round, and we still having such conversations. I think there are changes that are happening, but we're really grateful that still corporations need to continue to do more and endeavor to do more, especially for women. And then the second one, I'll really brush through very quickly. I think we cannot overemphasize mentorship for women within the organizations themselves. Be very intentional about structuring mentorship that will empower women into leadership positions. And also Wits Business School, my alma mater, offers a course which you can also enroll your female women in leadership course. Actually, so when I looked at the course content, some of the MBA modules that we did are included in that course. So if you're looking for a crash course in MBA as well, very good program. Enroll your female leaders in such courses, and have on-the-job leadership development training and mentorship programs structured at just uplifting women across the board, from technical, finance, etc. And then some of the success stories that I've seen, the first one would be the late Ntombi Ntuli. I think we cannot have this conversation and not mention her. She's a phenomenal leader that at the time bridged the gap between private sector and public sector at a time where the procurement program in South Africa for renewables came to a standstill, and she lobbied for private sector so that we can have, continued progression of renewable energy rollout in the country, as well as the liberalization of the renewable energy sector in South Africa. I think she's somebody very phenomenal. May her soul continue to rest in peace for the phenomenal work she's done. And we thank ACWA for taking a chance on a woman such as her. And then the second, I think previously you had conversations with the lady Lungile from the DBSA. I think she's a phenomenal woman, occupies a high senior position within the DBSA itself, and her leaders, the executive directorship of the DBSA consists of a lot of phenomenal women, and they are doing a lot of great work just to uplift women within the DFI and the banking space, and that's really, really phenomenal. And lastly, I'll speak about my employer, because I was there years ago. I left and I came back for one reason and one reason only. They really do take a chance on women. It's an organization that is truly reflective of the demographics of South Africa within the employee force. You come to the office, people look like the demographics of South Africa in our office. And our CFO is a young Black female like myself. She's very capable, and she's allowed a seat at the table and given opportunities to be a decision maker for the South African office. Our HR lead is a phenomenal young woman as well. So I really appreciate that organizations take a chance and uplift women and allow them to grow and to be key and pivotal in decision-making and strategic rationale for the country as well. And that's what I'm really benefiting from, afforded opportunities to say, what do we want our strategy to be as a country? And what is my opinion? What are my thoughts? And I really appreciate it. And I think corporates can do a lot in that space where women are uplifted and asked those pivotal questions, and their input is taken into consideration.
Thank you so much for that, and I love the fact that, you know, it's not just giving us a seat at the table, but to actually listen and hear the views, because otherwise we can easily land in. I recently heard of a bias. What is it? The highest paid earner or the highest paid person. That bias gets created where everybody looks to see what is the CEO saying, and then you kind of then just get a confirmation of what that view is. So it's great then that when you have organizations that have that ingrained in their DNA, that you then are allowing for different voices to come in. And I absolutely love that you mentioned Sis Ntombi. I mean, I don't think people recognize or realize the phenomenal impact that she's had, not only on the sector, the energy sector, the wind industry, but what an impact she's had on individual lives. I think what Ntombi represents is the fact that you need a woman to get things done, because she will do so with kindness. She will do so with compassion. There's people who, you know, have had, I mean, I was fortunate enough to meet Ntombi back, and I was still very young in my career at the beginning, working on these deals. And she was one of the people signing. I needed to get something signed for her. And of the people that I dealt with, nobody paid attention. They were like, oh, she's just a little skivvy here to make me sign something. But she actually took the time to have the conversation, to say, oh, who are you? What's made you interested in this space? You know, and I love how you're also mentioning women like Lungile. We were fortunate enough to have her as part of the podcast in our financing episode. And again, how do you have a conversation about financing without leaders like that? And I think, you know, what these women and women like yourselves represent is that no longer can the excuse be made that they are not there. We are here, and not only are we here, we are demonstrating exceptional leadership skills. And I'd like to, you know, bring Noluthando back into the conversation here in really unpacking this concept of leading and leadership in the sector, and get your views in terms of what are some of the key areas where you would like to see more women leading in the sector. And from your experience, you know, from almost being there from the inception of the renewable energy sector in South Africa, have there been any visible improvements in representation over the years?
So I think there are areas where there is visible improvement. And I think for me, those are areas where there was a big push from a regulatory compliance. So it's almost like a compliance exercise that, okay, we need to have this kind of representation, Black people, women, in these different facets of the value chain of a project, in order for you to have a competitive bid, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that over there, and that's how it starts, unfortunately, you know, that's how it starts. And you see how the spaces where that push has been made from like a compliance perspective, how more and more the voice of women is cemented, and it's real, and an opportunity. It isn't just kind of window dressing, but women are sitting in those discussions and are taken seriously and are making really valuable contributions from that side of the coin. I think for me, where I think we need to sharpen our pencils a bit more, and where I'd like to see more women representation, is in the strategic functions of this of the energy sector and of the space. Right now, the sector is largely project dependent, right? And is trying to solve a much needed national problem or crisis. And so for me, I ask myself, who makes the decisions to open up and enable the sector to grow? And is there representation there? And I mean, for me, one example is, you know, the Minister of Electricity, a spanking new role in the ministry and in the cabinet, an opportunity for government to really put good representation into the sector, into the policy making parts of the structure. And again, much to my disappointment, and I suppose many others, we haven't seen that. And when you look at the policy making space, the regulatory space, I'm still disappointed at the number of representation there is there when it comes to the sector. And then the second layer becomes, who funds and really like drives capital into the sector. And again, when we look at like the local commercial banks, which are the biggest funding contributors, when you look at the asset management institutions who really take that long-term funding risk on these projects, who are the just from the executive suite of those institutions all the way to the heads of the desks, the heads of the project finance teams, the heads of the investments and credit teams, are largely male, you know, and in many instances, largely white men in those spaces, which means when we're structuring these transactions and sitting across the table, you're hearing the voices and opinions of men who are determining the next 23 years of this project, one project. And when you think about it on a more like global scale or a national scale, when you look at it in terms of many projects, it really is the whole sector that is the determination of the funding of the sector is in the hands of committees that are run by men, teams that are led by men, and transactors to some extent that are leading these transactions are men, right? I think there is a lot more progress on the transactional level and on the transactor level, where you are seeing, you know, lead transactors like myself and many others that are women. But there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done on the strategic level from my perspective. And then when you look at the money and the flow of money and the value chain then of the project, a big chunk of it, like about 80 to 85% on average, goes to the EPC aspects. And then the rest of it is what then covers, you know, kind of like what is called in the boardrooms, the low-hanging fruit. So the ED, the community contributions, those obligations, the rest of the regulatory obligations, which is where we're seeing a lot of women representation in. So to me, it says a big part of the financial value of these projects really still sits or really touches the hands of men and empowers the communities and spaces that men occupy. Because when you look at EPC and O&M contractors and key contractors, those, even the local teams and the business development teams are headed up by men. The strategic decisions of how the projects are being designed and how they're being executed on an ongoing basis, again, and how they're being budgeted and which local players will we partner with? Again, all those strategic decisions are still largely being driven by men. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think the energy sector, very different to other sectors, has an opportunity to radically transform the gender agenda of this country so that we don't have the same cycle that we've seen repeat in other sectors, repeat again in the energy sector. And that's where I'd like to see a lot more radical change. And that's the key value chain that I think at this point represent the concept of representation isn't regulated. And so there isn't really an incentive for institutions and organizations to think around how do we reform. And I mean, like I've existed in quite a few in terms of my career across the value chain. And much like Vutomi, I think the IPP space, or really the bidders, the tenderers are transforming a lot more better and are taking the representation question a lot more seriously. But I think in the first instance, it's because the responsibility on a regulatory / compliance perspective was pushed down. And so they've had to grapple with the principle and have really embedded those principles in the organization. And that's, for me, my 2 cents worth about visibility and representation over the years in the sector.
Thank you for that. And really important, because at the end of the day, and the point you've made about the IPP projects is that because there were targets, because for you to even be considered for this bid, you needed to comply with those economic development obligations. You needed to have procured from women-owned businesses. And I think we're at the point where it can no longer be a discussion. It should no longer be a choice. It is an imperative. It is an absolute imperative that we then, to your point, have strategies, have plans that then speak to that, because we're not going to miraculously get to this place if we don't if we don't instill this, and if we don't enforce some of these things. And for me, you know, as we see the wind down almost, or the uncertainty around the government procurement round, REAP, what's going to happen if there's no grid allocation, all of that, you're seeing a lot more on the private sector side of things. And I think my main concern from that perspective is that, at least from a government procurement, and at least for a large number of the rounds, you know, there was a big emphasis on those economic development obligations. And I just wonder how we will see that operating in the private sector. And I guess it then speaks to your point that every man has a voice, but money is the volume. And perhaps how we then get the private sector to then have to tick off or comply with these things, it is then to say, okay, you want the money must come with those conditions. And we do need to see more women holding the pen in those funding organizations, more women driving the fact that we're not just dispersing money because we're building a power plant, we're dispersing money because we need to see meaningful socioeconomic development, because as women, we inherently keep thinking that. I've seen we're an emerging fund manager, we're raising an infrastructure fund, and very often, and I love it that the guys are very focused on financial return, but my voice in the organization is to say, but what about the social aspects? That, okay, cool, the project can still give you a financial return. Just because there's a woman who's involved in the workforce we're not having a return conversation. The numbers are still going to stack up, but let's see better representation. Let's see how we can increase participation of women across that infrastructure value chain. Zinhle, I want to bring you back into the conversation, and especially when looking at, you know, corporates and organizations. Vutomi spoke about and unpacked around leadership and what organizations can do in terms of getting those leaders in the organization. But the reality is, for us to be able to pick those leaders and get them up to that point, we need to be empowering the entire workforce, and we need to start from the ground up. So what, in your view, or how can renewable energy companies really ensure gender diversity and inclusion in their workforce?
Yeah, thank you so much, Thokozile. I think I really love what also Nolu's touched on about just ticking the boxes in terms of we need Black women or Black businesses, women owned, to tick this box in order to qualify for that tender. But I think also it's important that we not having this conversation just to fill up women in our space. You know, we want women that are capable, we want women that can do the work, and we want women that are determined to push forward through the industry and break boundaries, right? And there are women who are like that. It's just for the space to open up and be more welcoming of such women. So we are not saying we just want women to fill up the positions, but we know that there are women that are capable and women that are talented to fill these positions. And I like what you said about starting from the ground up, because that is very important. What Nolu has highlighted is that she doesn't want the renewable energy space to repeat the same mistakes of the other previous entities, you know, like just breaking gender stereotypes. So the most important way is also to start from ground up. I think one of the ways that we can open up gender diversity in that perspective is to open up more opportunities to new graduates. So what Ugeshree said in the beginning was that they need 2 more years of experience. So we need to break such boundaries, and we need to create more junior roles that university graduate students can fill in order to start from the ground up and to elevate themselves to the higher positions. Because I think if we do that, then we are able to find fresh talent, we are able to find talent that we can equip and talent that we can nurture for them to elevate themselves up to the higher positions. So I think one of the really feasible ways we can do that is by these entities opening up internship programs for university students. I, for one, was introduced in the renewable energy space through an internship by Enitrack South Africa. What they did was to advertise the internship programs through the universities, and that's how I got to hear about, oh, there's actually something called renewable energy, so you can actually have a career in that space. So we are having these conversations, but there's a kid in UKZN, there's a girl in UKZN now that doesn't even know that there's a space called the renewable energy sector, the renewable energy space. How are we making sure that we get the information out there, is to have such initiatives on advertising junior roles, junior positions, internships to university students, so that we have that raw talent that is still fresh and we can nurture it and they can elevate themselves up into the sector. And I also think that in terms of governance within our organizations, we really need to have laws that favor women. I think we need to have those in place and be enforced. And I think mental health days, for an example, are really important for women. And I think if we know that women go menstrual pains every month, so if on that specific day of the month you are not feeling well, then I think it should be your right to take that day off as a mental health day, because you are not in your right state because you have hormonal imbalances on that day. So I think it's the littlest of things like that, the most fundamental things in understanding the biology of how a woman functions and how that impacts their work. And that is not to say women are fragile or women always think emotionally, but it is important that we also take care of our mental health in order to give our A game in the space. And I think that is one of the ways that the industry can also have diversity and inclusion, especially include women, and in the laws and the governance of the companies. We need these things in order for women to function and give their A game in the space.
Thank you so much for that. And I love how you also speaking about the real issues, right? The reality is, hormonally as women, I was reading something, we go through 4 different personalities in a month. The fact that we are able to achieve and do so much, I think, just as further confirmation of our power and our brilliance. But that also shouldn't be taken for granted, and that space does need to be created. I think the work, entrepreneurship, the world is really geared towards a patriarchal male view. I mean, I think I was reading recently that the air conditioning temperature in offices, when they were working out what the correct temperature is, what they used as a measure, or who it was measured against, was a white male. But now, obviously, at the time, those were the people that were in the buildings. But we have to be looking at how do we then accommodate that we have a diverse society, and we therefore must have a diverse workforce, and we need to be able to accommodate for that. Ugeshree, I want to bring you back into the conversation, and really just a continuation of, you touched on the opportunities from an economic development perspective, BE from an entrepreneurial perspective, and Zinhle's just spoken around, the importance of laws that then are speaking to gender and are actually ensuring the equal participation of women. How do you see the role of policy and regulatory frameworks facilitating the participation and the advancement? Because I think we must move beyond participating, but we now need to thrive and advance. So the advancement of women in the energy sector.
Thank you for that question. Well, the harsh reality is that had it not been for policy and framework, most of us might not actually be present for this podcast. And as much as that's saddening to know, I think at the same time, when you look at the renewable energy industry and the uniqueness that it offers Black females and small businesses, it really makes me very proud to be part of the sector, and I think very difficult to lead the sector, because it really is all about creating opportunities for others. And as we delve into specifically the economic development requirements, that's part of the tendering process that falls under REAP. And now, as we're experiencing the private sector as well, to a large extent, they are sort of replicating those requirements as well when you see those tenders that are being issued, because obviously you need to go to a tendering process first before you actually can win or be awarded a project and then close off and go into construction, which is the normal process that we follow. So I'm just going to pause a bit and unpack economic development, because if you want to understand the opportunities within the sector, you need to look at those 7 elements. and what goes into the tenders first, and then those projects, whether they are in construction or whether they are in operations phase, those opportunities will last for a long time. And those 7 elements include, firstly, job creation. When you look at job creation, there's a specific sub-element for women. And if you look at just the round 7 bid now, there's percentages that's allocated in terms of what commitments are being made when you are actually looking at the job profile for that project. So for example, if you say you're going to have about 10 to 15% of women within your project, you would score about 0.5 points. If you target a higher amount, up to 30%, and higher, you would score 0.25%. So that's just a job creation element. And the way the scoring happens is that you score out of 10 points when you submit your tender, and each element has sub-elements, and that's how you break down what you're going to score. And then thankfully, due to our minister and due to the sector that we are in, your tender is awarded based on price and economic development. So economic development is extremely important. The other element is when you look at ownership. Unique again. Yes, there's community ownership required with the projects. So at least 2.5% of the project must be owned by the community, very, very unique. And also women-owned ownership. So, for example, round 5 had a minimum threshold. You had to have a 5% women-owned partner, Black women-owned partner, to actually win the tender, or before you can even submit the tender, or you'll be disqualified. So that's so unique in terms of the tendering process and what is required from a compliance perspective with regard to those ED commitments that you make. I'm going to unpack another element, management control. You need to have women at board level. You need to have Black female representation at board level. You need to have Black female representation at executive level. You need to have Black female representation at senior management level, and submit what the structures are going to look like when you're tendering, and then ensure that you will be implementing that during construction and the operations phase. So for me, that's very exciting, because you have to, if you want to win and you want to be compliant, you're going to have to submit that in your plans. But the way the sector is being shaped now is that there's also auditing that's happening, that's in process as well. So you cannot say that, yes, we're doing this and just, submit and without substantiated evidence. And then that too is being audited. So government is coming down very, very harsh. They're taking it very seriously in the sector. Don't just make commitments to win a tender, but make sure you're going to see it through, or you will be penalized in the form of penalties that's calculated, and you see it, 1 million rand, 2 million rand, it can go up to many millions of rands if you do not fulfill the commitments that you have made. So again, the opportunities for females is large across all the elements. And as one of the other panel members have mentioned, visit the IPP office website and look at the opportunities, go into and participate in different conference, etc., and speak to us as economic development consultants around the opportunities if you're not aware of it. Another thing that I think is quite interesting that I want to share specific to economic development, and what I found my experience is that where we found ourselves, starting off very competing with other, for example, economic development companies, now we are working in collaboration. The industry is actually forcing that, but I think it has also happened organically as well, because of, sharing work opportunities, tender opportunities, but specifically, for example, with the risk mitigation project, where we have, multiple technologies, we have at least 6 ED consultants working on that project. And likewise, you're finding more collaborative opportunities as well when you look at asset management companies where, they bring in ED specialists, they bring in technical specialists and say, let's be a one-shop office that offers all these different solutions. So for me, that's also very, very exciting to see how the industry is shaping itself. But most importantly is then the opportunities that are being enforced within the industry to see that you will be monitored and reported on, you will be audited. Do not just make these commitments, but actually live it. So it's very exciting times for us to actually see, and we will see those impacts. I think previously within the industry, as you drive to the communities, you're not really seeing, the impact that renewable energy projects are supposed to be bringing to these communities. But with the way the regulations are being enforced now, that is also going to shift. You're going to know that there's a renewable project before you even cite it. You're going to see the improvements of schools and businesses opening up. So massive opportunities that are being created. And for me, as mentioned, it's very exciting to be part of this industry and create these opportunities. Whilst I have the floor, also want to thank all the females that have given women-owned businesses opportunities, because I think it takes a big you need to have not just IQ but also EQ to be able to support other females and not necessarily be threatened by them. So I encourage more females to support smaller businesses, and I have seen that happening. But please do more of that, and know that really great leaders are not necessarily threatened by those that are employed by you, but actually as your team shine, you also shine. And it's really better to be in a position where you have people in your team that know more than you, so that you can focus on what you need to focus on. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for that, Ugesh, and really great insight shared. And I love what you're saying about women supporting women, because in as much as we've spoken about men and how they need to come to the party, I think it's also important that as women, we also move past the novelty of being first and only female in a space and wanting to hold on to that. I think it's very important to say that is so 2020. So that's so 2000. Like, we can't still be thinking that. What you should be trying to do, all of us, wherever we are, is trying to find ways to make the circle bigger. Devaksha, I want to just bring you back into the conversation here and really, again, to hear the entrepreneurial view and hear from you, what are some of the public or private sector enterprise development initiatives that you've been able to access and that have supported you in developing your business in the sector?
So at the early stages of starting my consultancy, I think one of the biggest things I did was to try and actually put in a search term for those opportunities that are out there, because from experience I gained, I figured that the only way to get into these spaces was to join an acceleration program. And coming from a pure technical background, I lacked certain skills in marketing and finance and the skills that we were not trained in as professionals. So these programs offer a whole host of different aspects, which include sales and marketing, business development, finance. There's a few that I joined initially, two that I'd name. One was the WOMHUB program, acceleration program, and it was called the Entrepreneurial Growth Program Acceleration. So it was for a different stage of business. And the other was with the Chartered Accountancy Association, SICA. So those were two that made a real impact on my end. And I specifically joined those for certain reasons that they had as part of their modules, like finance with SICA. And on WOMHUB was basically networking and opening up into the client base that they were busy with, such as the Sassels and the De Beers mines. So, but there are definitely programs that are out there. I think they probably not marketed well enough, and that's why as my years went into the business, I decided to start pulling back and start joining these companies and actually working to market them. So like WOMHUB and myself, we've got good relationship to now market them and bring more female entrepreneurs into the space and expose WOMHUB and what they do and how they actually assist you, and even to some extent even assist them to how to tailor make some of their packages. So the thing that I found with some of the other programs that I did join along my path was that it wasn't fulfilling you in the way that it needed to be. So there was definitely gaps in their program. It goes back to things being a tick box exercise where they would get funding and they now have to empower a female in the entrepreneurial space, and they then put you there and make you sign a register and be done. There's no value add out of it. So you got to pick and choose the program that you want to be participating in. But the way that I spun that around was that, can we not change this and add in the skills that a real entrepreneur needs? And at what stage of your business are you? Are you an early starter? Are you medium? Are you ready to scale up? That's, I think, is key, because I found myself sometimes sitting in a room where somebody's more advanced than I am. They've been in business for 12 years and they still labeled as a startup. And that's not, we all coming from different ends. So there are programs you got to choose which programs you want to get into. I think they're not marketed appropriately. And that goes back to what my colleagues were saying about how do we network and get ourselves out there? How do we start getting into conversations with people where we find out about this? So I personally have started initiatives where we now try to attract females in industry who are at different stages of their business. And we're busy putting that program together as part of the training academy that we've launched. And we're now trying to see how can we now expose what's out there. So we're basically the middleman in terms of exposure and what the person on the ground root. So we spoke about the Sandtons and the Cape Towns and all of that, but the rural areas. So we've trained students in the Tibet colleges in rural areas who know nothing about this path. And how now do we get to those grassroots levels? So that's what we're busy with personally. And that comes from the experience that I've had from these programs that have been available.
Thank you very much for that, Devaksha. Really some insightful insights that you've shared. And I love, again, the importance of going beyond the urban areas, but really going into rural communities, because if we actually aren't doing the work there, it becomes a ticking time bomb. Because at the end of the day, if we really need to be focused on broad-based empowerment, broad-based transformation, and getting to those areas where it is needed the most. I think it is in those areas where if you're there in the community, you actually start recognizing the fact that the things that you are looking for, like you find yourself resting at a place of saying, I am desiring luxuries, whereas this person's deep desire is, I need to figure out how am I going to actually buy pap, not even meat, because pap is what is able to be afforded. And I think sometimes we forget about those communities. Some of us are fortunate enough, I guess, to have family still in those communities to go back and still do work there. But I think it's very important that we have a full appreciation of LSM levels in South Africa, and that initiatives need to touch at all of those levels. As we wrap up this really enlightening conversation, and I'd like us to look ahead at the future. We've been blessed and fortunate to have you on this podcast, and it has really resulted in us in having very unique and different perspective of opportunities that are available in the energy sector. And I'd like to close off with some closing remarks from each of our guests, and to hear from you, what in your opinion are the biggest opportunities currently available for women in the South African energy sector?
So, Thokozile, thank you. I think the biggest opportunities are endless, to be quite honest. Lots and lots of opportunities. I think from the panel, you can see that from a technical point of view, if you have a background in engineering, if you have a background in finance and law, the sciences like myself, there are a lot of opportunities across the entire value chain of the renewable energy sector. So I'll speak from my point of a business developer point of view. If you've studied whatever that you've studied, really, you just have to be business-minded, strategic thinker, logical thinker, and really be a great salesperson at that as well, because we're really selling power to the likes of Eskom and private off-takers such as large mines. So if you have skills in selling, and there are opportunities for people to enter into this space. Tomorrow we're having new interns joining our business development team. Unfortunately, it was quite disappointing that you see females showing up for these interviews, young individuals, very, very unprepared, extremely unprepared. So always prepare. The opportunities are there. And my goal as a female was like, my girlies are going to come through for me. They'll be very prepared. They weren't. We're getting males as business development interns. So women prepare. Opportunities are there across the board. No matter what you've studied, there's a place for you.
Thank you very much, Noluthando.
Yes. So, I mean, for me, I guess in the theme of what we've discussed, I mean, the more we network and we create spaces and platforms like these, where we kind of just break the walls and get to meet more women. For me, the great opportunity there and the opportunity to make our own table becomes even more fathomable and imaginable. And so to me, I'm just like, can more women come into the space? But as they're coming to the space, can we speak to each other? Can we meet each other more often and create opportunity for us to build our own table in the space?
Thank you very much, Noluthando. I love the concept of a table because we actually are there. If we look at it, we have sufficient skills in terms of women to be able to build this very massive table. Zinhle, your closing remarks?
Thanks, Thokozile. I think my closing remarks would be, if you're looking into entering the energy space, it doesn't matter what you studied. I think it's important not to be necessarily role focused, because when you get into the space, you see that each and every role is interdependent. So I, for an example, studied geography. I thought I was going to work as an environmental consultant, but instead I hire environmental consultants to look at our projects and review their reports to see how, you know, our projects are impacting the environment. So I think it's very important not to be necessarily role focused, but when you get into the space and then be specific about what you want, and then you can always get there. Just upskill yourself, see what is it that you are really passionate about in the space, and then it's only then that you can upskill yourself within that specific area, because all the roles are interdependent. Project development, ED compliance, technical, it's all interdependent, and it's very easy to transfer skills. So once you get into the space, be like a sponge, absorb everything, and then you will filter through as you go up and see what you want to specialize in.
Thank you very much, Zinhle. Ugesh, your closing remarks in terms of opportunities for women in the energy sector?
Thank you. As Noluthando has mentioned, the opportunities really sits within the value chain of these projects. So as you unpack it and whatever phase it is in and understand what services are required, that is where the opportunity lies. And I think that to those listeners who are also not sure where you fit in, I think understand what is your passion. Know what your skill set is and align that to your purpose, to your life's purpose. When you have those three things in alignment, you have universal alignment. And from my experience, it's not just doors that will open for you. It's a whole world that will open up with you. So truly understand what's your passion, truly understand also what it is to contribute towards the economy, how you want to add value to the poorest of people within our society, and see how can I impact at that level, at a micro level, at a macro level. Actually, both these are at macro level, if you can change lives positively. And when you have that alignment and you have that vision, nothing will stop you. In fact, as mentioned, doors will open up for you to be able to achieve that vision that you set for yourself.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring you back into the conversation for your closing remarks.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what Ugesh said. I think it's quite serendipitous that she mentioned passion. So I'm going to leave the viewers or the listeners with a bit of homework and to investigate the concept of Ikigai, because that's where my experience started, coming out of the experiences that I had in toxic environments. So go and look at that concept. It's a Japanese concept. Go and investigate it and understand what it is. So just picking up on that. And my parting comment is, I think, a challenge to my fellow colleagues. So we took a stance late last week to, we've always been nominated for awards and all of that, and it's nice to be recognized. But we took a different stance and we decided to sponsor an award. So there's an organization called Vutomi, and they're having their 5th STEAM awards. STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I'm a big advocate of that. So we decided to sponsor the engineering category. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, I mean, I can afford to do that. But from a corporate perspective, a challenge to my colleagues to say, go back to your executives and senior managers and say, listen, we need to start participating in these activities. Vutomi mentioned her alma mater, but we're part of industry bodies that have student chapters, and I go on occasion out to go and speak to females that are already in the engineering space, but also then to schools with youths that are now looking for what careers they want to take. And it's all coming down to exposure. So my biggest passion is taking it back to the girl child, and making sure that they choose careers that would interest them in the STEM environment. So that's my parting comment, is how do we give back? We now in this space and we're busy trying to climb in that space, but let's not forget where we came from, and try and make it a little bit easier for the young girl that's now going to follow the path as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. And I love how, conversations around the value chain. So it's important to take the time, understand the sector, understand the industry, understand it by technology, and then see where the opportunities are and try fulfill that. Because at the end of the day, whether you are trying to be an employee or you're trying to run a business, you need to be solving for something. So go and understand what it is that you are solving for. And once you are going to understand that and then upskill yourself in that area, you become a valuable resource to any organization, or you become that formidable woman who then goes on to inspire the next generation. And maybe, Devaksha, just to your point on Ikigai, I absolutely love that concept. I do encourage everybody to go research it. I, for one, can say that I am in my Ikigai. And it's a beautiful place. And I would hope that every single person is able to find that in their journey and recognize that it is possible to find that in the energy sector as well. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Energy Conversations podcast. I want to extend my sincerest gratitude to our guests for sharing their invaluable insights and sharing with us candidly about their lived experiences in the sector. It is clear that we still have a long way to go, but we must acknowledge and recognize the progress that has been made and the fact that this conversation in itself could exist. And today we really continued on our journey, not only to demystify the South African landscape, but to empower ordinary South Africans by providing them with the insights and information in terms of how they can find their place there. Join us next time as we continue our exploration. Until then, remember that the power to change our energy future lies within each of us. Thank you for tuning in, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining us on the Energy Conversations podcast, powered by Bayaka Infrastructure Partners, an authorized financial services provider, and the African Energy Leadership Center at the Wits Business School. Together, we are committed to empowering communities and fostering meaningful dialogue around the South African energy sector. Remember to subscribe, and let's shape South Africa's energy future together.